All right, one more brief video on Aquinas, the Summa. At least to me, it seems as though in class, this has been one of the easier things to understand. Again, because Thomas is breaking down all of his arguments into really, really careful step-by-step logical geometrical pieces. Why? Because he's a good teacher. He knows how to make things sort of click together in a way that make the learner, the beginner, understand them. I think he's got a difficult thing that he's doing. He's trying to combine all of Aristotle, all of Plato, a lot of other scriptural sources and theologians as well, into like this really complicated metaphysical picture of the universe. If some things about Christian revelation are true that we take on faith, and if a heck of a lot of things are also understandable by human reason, but not all of them. It's similar to any kind of project that would admit that there are some things that we can know by human reason, some things we can't, and any kind of project that would be willing to admit a couple things that sort of seemed like they could be possibly true, even if we couldn't prove them or immediately like show them via human reason. So like the structure of it is, I do think in the end, like somewhat similar to a lot of the kind of like half reason, half not reason systems that we find ourselves constructing. It's more complicated than simply metaphysics, but it's expressed so clearly, and it's expressed in a way that you can sort of see the exact, you can see all the moving parts and all the stuff that's happening inside the clock, all the little gears moving together, that I think it's helpful to understand. It's helpful for you as students of metaphysics to think about how metaphysics could be used to talk about a very specific subject and illuminate a very specific subject, namely the relationship of reason to something like religion. At the very beginning of the year, I was talking about how metaphysics class is kind of like a mixture of science and religion class. So I think Aquinas is one of the best views into why that would be true. When we do Hume next week, Hume is more obviously the science aspect, and Aquinas is more obviously the religion aspect. But you can see we've had a fair amount to say about the natural world, about the natural causes, when we're talking about Thomas Aquinas. Fun fact, if you want to know more about Aquinas, you can take a medieval philosophy class. Aquinas is at least half of any medieval philosophy class. We offer them at St. John's. If it's a real pleasure to sort of see how all the different parts of his system fit together. And we do have very good people who understand a great deal about Thomas. One fun fact that it's not important that you actually know this, but people who study and who believe that Aquinas is essentially correct about philosophy, religion, life, you call them Thomists. So if you ever see the word, it looks like Thomist, Thomist. You say it Thomist, but we're talking about Thomas because Thomas is the first name of Thomas d'Aquino, the guy named Thomas from Aquino, Italy, who is the guy who became the monk and became a saint, and wrote this book. So those are all important things that I think help locate why we're studying Aquinas, what he's good for, and how you can study more of him if you desire. Let me share the screen for you here. So taking a look at question 3, article 2, whether God is composed of matter and form. We saw in this question of whether or not God has a body, that given the stuff that we'd argued to prove that God is the first mover, the first efficient cause, the most necessary being, it doesn't look like God can have a body, because he has to be pure actuality in some way. He can't have potency, he can't move, bodies can move, etc. So this is basically a very similar argument. It kind of makes more specific what it would mean not to have a body. And so here you see these classic Aristotle categories that we've already done, excuse me, of matter and form. So this is the formal cause, which is like the shape or the look or the what it is to be of something. And then the matter, which is like the stuff or the bronze of like what something is made out of that also sustains it. This is what, for Thomas Aquinas and also for Aristotle, that anything that we see with our senses is going to have both matter and a form. The bronze statue will have the form of the statue, and it will also have the bronze that makes the actual statue. So that means that if God doesn't have a body, he can't also have matter and form, because no body has matter. Anything that is a body has to have matter and form. God doesn't have a body, therefore he can't have matter and form. But here I think, so in a way, like you don't really need to spell this out. Like it follows pretty plainly from the previous question. But Aquinas is such a good teacher. He wants to make sure that everyone's got it. Is on the same page with him. So that's why we're doing this. So take a look at the first objection. Again, we're quoting scripture. God seems to be referring to his soul. The soul would be the form of the body. So it kind of looks like scripture is claiming that God has matter and form. God seems to have anger and joy. You can't have these without matter. You can't have them without like feeling heat is the classic example. Like when you get mad, what feels heat? Not just a pure soul, but a body, something that has matter and form. So looks like God seems to have both. Okay, let's look at the on the contrary. Okay, this is exactly what I just argued. If you got matter and form, you have a body. Because in order to have dimension at all, to be in space, that's a property of matter. So therefore we can't have this at all. Let's take a look at the arguments. The most important one is this one. Let's see. Every agent acts by its form. Hence, the manner in which it has form is the manner in which it is an agent. Therefore, whatever is primarily and essentially an agent must be primarily and essentially form. God's the first agent. He's the first efficient cause. He is therefore of his essence a form, and not composed of matter and form. Well, that one takes you pretty far. You have to be convinced of the premise that every agent acts by its form. An example of this would be when I hit the ball with the bat, something of the motion, the quality of the motion of that gets passed to the ball. In some way, the form of the motion gets passed from the one to the other. So God can only act when he moves us with a form, or where you're moved by his form. So here it's sort of like playing on your intuition that whatever we've proved in the first question and the second question, the way that God acts has to be through primarily form and not matter. This argument's a little fishy, but it does allow you to sort of picture what an agent acting by pure form alone would look like. So, and then Aquinas goes out on a limb, which is why he's making this argument. He's therefore of his essence of form. So remember, in the via negativa, the negative way, we said we weren't going to prove what God was. We were going to prove what he isn't. So we started off by saying, well, he's not a body. He doesn't have matter and form. But in this particular, I answer that we are making a definitive claim. He is of his essence of form. So that's a step. It's a move. It's partly justified, and this is something that Thomists and people who are scholars of Aquinas love to talk about. Can you really do this? Can you really move from purely negative to positive knowledge? I don't know. I have to leave that unresolved for you. It's what you have to do is you have to examine each argument and see if the conclusions really do follow from the premises. And that's what metaphysics scholars argue about. But I think what is important about this is if Thomas is right, not having a body is plain, not having matter and form because he doesn't have a body, that's plain. Does that also mean he is primarily a form? That's the fishy step. But we do know he doesn't have matter and form. That's plain enough. I think that follows geometrically from what we said before. So if that's true, then all the same stuff that's happening in the previous article where he doesn't have a body is happening again. He can't have anger. He doesn't have a soul, because a soul is something that has a body, and God doesn't seem to have a body. You see how this poses problems for questions of Jesus, etc. It definitely also means that God can't be male or female, at least in Aquinas language, because male or female would be coming from some arrangement of matter. So if God doesn't have matter, he can't be male or female, and all of this he stuff is not necessarily justified. But so this is helpful because it gives you a specific way of thinking about what would it be like for any kind of entity or object not to have matter and form. Could I imagine myself into something that was purely a form? And that's a question that will follow us for the rest of the semester. We won't go into articles 3 and 4 in this video very much, although they're fun to read. But here's the positive aspect of what Aquinas does want to say about the nature of God, which we talked about just a little bit last time. He is the same as his essence or nature. Because he doesn't have any kind of potentiality or body at all, he's sort of like the perfect metaphysical entity, perfect form, perfect actuality. God is his very Godhead. If you can think of him as a more perfect kind of existence. And that's where he heads to in the 4th article. Yes, essence and existence are the same. To be God is to exist as God, to be the perfection of God. All the rest of living things and any kind of entity in the entire universe, there's some kind of difference between what it means to be perfectly the kind of thing we are and to exist as that thing. But God's not like that. He is perfect in this particular argument. So as you can see, you end up learning like a whole lot of God. And we talked about this when we started looking at Aquinas for the first time. Aristotle says that man is oriented towards happiness as his end. Aquinas claims that man is oriented towards God as the end. So if God is like this perfect, existing, fully active, fully existing thing, that's quite an entity to be directed towards. And it sort of makes sense why we would be directed towards that kind of entity. And if you really are curious, and it is a lot of fun, you can spend time in a medieval philosophy class going into all of these different relationships. I'll show you. So again, like the first part, you talk about God for a lot, God's love, providence, predestination, justice and mercy, etc. You get to the Trinity, the creation, good and evil, a personal favorite, not really, treatise on the angels. Turns out that the angels are form, no matter, but not the most perfect kind of form that God is. All these things, treatise on man, what humanity is. Right about here, this is where a lot of Aristotle comes in. Aristotle's ethics essentially gets dropped in right here to the Summa. Treatise on the habits, on the virtues, more pure Aristotle. So you can see, long book, interesting. Talks about everything. It's a great example of a book that that attempts to be about simply everything in the world. So, all right, that's enough, and I'll see you guys on the forums. And I'll see you next week.